classic video game reviews, more than other mediums, occasionally age poorly. As a relatively new artistic medium, the goalposts of objective video game quality are constantly moving. Tech goes fast, tastes change, and innovation happens almost yearly. Classics endure, no question, but in the eyes and minds of most gamers, we're always looking forward to the next big thing. Earthbound is a prime example of a game underappreciated in its time. According to Stephen Hansen at Destructoid, if you aggregated the scores of the day, Earthbound would have hovered around the mid-70s. Every critic of the time claimed it was a kiddie game. Another Nintendo-born baby fest with bad graphics and juvenile humor. Jeff Lundgren of Game Player magazine was among the most negative, giving the graphics a 6, citing it barely looks better than an 8-bit game. And while he gave the gameplay an 8, he cautions older ones, meaning gamers, are likely to be bored stiff with it. But the oddest thought to me is in the innovation section, where Jeff gives it a 5, stating some of the enemies are a hoot, and there are some cool touches, but you've seen most of this before. Now, you may not be somebody who takes stock in reviews, and that's fine. That's perfectly fine. But even if you don't jive with the opinions, as a mirror to public perception and taste, they're a pretty decent time capsule. And it makes me wonder if Jeff and others played this game to the end. Because if they had, there's no way they could have claimed that this was a game only for children. The ending of Earthbound is rich with themes, pathos, tension, and even a touch of junior body horror. By the time you hit Magic Hand and begin battling your personal demons, the story takes on a deeper tone and a more personal bent. On part 4 of our exploration of Earthbound, we discuss the game's ending, from a surreal trip through our memories to a sweet, poignant conclusion. Earthbound's final moments makes every rushed review of the day seem outdated and incomplete. Time to enlist an army of flying men, take on Gigas, and pray, pray, pray as we jump into Earthbound Part Fourside, the final moments. Now, before we get started talking about the ending, I wanted to share a few quick stories of how Earthbound intersects with people's real-world experiences. When a game is rich and interesting as Earthbound is, and especially given the connection people have with it, it's not surprising that this game is connected with people in a very personal way. Starting us off on this conversation is Bram Stoker Award winner Robert P. Ottone, followed by Dan, aka Captain Gingerbeard, and then finally Celeste from the Another Zelda podcast.
I have a book out right now called The Vile Thing We Created from Hydra Publications. That's my latest release, and that's kind of what I'm on the book tour for right now. But I'm nominated for the Bram Stoker Award for Superior Achievement in a Young Adult Novel for my book, The Triangle, which is for kids, younger readers, young adult. So I carried a lot of stuff from my youth into that. And I'm actually working on something now for middle graders. And I'm having the most fun writing for middle graders because the best thing about that is you could be aspirational, but you could be fun at the same time.
Sure.
And it's funny in writing this little group of kids who are all wonderfully diverse and very different and very fun. I'm thinking about Ness, Paula, Jeff, and Pooh while I'm writing it. And I'm like, God, this game is always with me. It is always in my mind. And it's I'm heartbroken that comic book has not been translated and is not able to be purchased in America translated, because the amount of money I would throw at that is preposterous.
Yeah.
But
That's funny.
Anything it just means a lot to me. There's like some people who have like, a favorite movie. And of course I have a favorite movie, but there's always the thing I get most nostalgic for. And I'm a big believer in nostalgia being the poison to creativity. But the one thing I allow myself nostalgia for is Earthbound.
Yeah. Definitely sounds like that's just the formative one. That sounds like, and I love when a game can inspire all aspects of life, not just you as a kid or as an adult or connecting with your dad, but also your creativity as well. Kind of taking those themes and applying them to your life. Congratulations on the Bram Stoker Award. I've heard of it. I think I have friends who I used to do a decent amount of fiction writing, and I have friends who've been nominated and such for similar style awards, and that just rings to me for some reason. So,
oh, very cool. Thank you. I'm excited. I'm nervous. I'm just happy to be there.
You did mention something a little earlier. I'm going to broach the subject. If you don't want to get into it, I don't have to. Obviously, this is a safe place for this sort of thing. But you mentioned Earthbound coming up in therapy. Wow, that sounds. I don't know if I've ever had a game come up in any of my therapy sessions. Without divulging too much, without getting, obviously, your comfort level is paramount. But I'd love to hear what the context of that is.
I talk a lot about my dad in therapy. I lost my dad a few years ago, and
I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you. And he really did everything he could to make me and my siblings and my mother's life like as perfect as possible. And honestly, it really was. Like I grew up like I had everything that I wanted. You know what I mean? Like I was not spoiled, but I didn't want for anything.
Right. Yeah.
And Earthbound was really like, I think probably the game that I wanted more than any other video game in the history of games for me, because it just looked so different and I was so interested and so excited about it. And knowing that my dad had to go to multiple Toys R Us's to get it. Sure. Yeah. Like that was a sincerely touching thing that I think about. And I just remember like I got it for Christmas. And I remember it was snowing out. It was like really coming down. I was 11 years old playing Earthbound. And I remember my dad checking in and being like, oh, is that game? That's the same one you're playing? And I was like, yeah, Dad. And like he would go and shovel the walkway or whatever. Sure. And I just remember like getting to Summers and seeing the beach and looking outside and seeing the snow and seeing the beach in the game. And growing up on Long Island is all beaches. And I was just like, right, something is here. It feels alive to me. And I was talking about that sort of thing with my therapist and how like the connection between the written word and a fictional world can have such a lasting impact on somebody. And now in my own writing, I try to take those moments and kind of put them into my work, especially my work that I do for younger readers, because I think that there's a lot of value in sort of mining that territory, but also letting them know that like, it's okay to notice these things and have these moments because you're going to want them in the future and you're going to want to remember them in the future.
So you mentioned before you have an 11-year-old son. You guys went to see Mario movie recently and all that. Has he had an opportunity to play Earthbound?
He has had an opportunity to play, and he stopped playing right at the same point that I told you everyone else stops playing.
Oh, man. Okay.
So, I don't know. Maybe I can get him to get back into it at some point.
There you go. Well, if you get him to get back into it, I would love to come back to that conversation and see what his thought was. Maybe not have him on the show, but through your perspective, like, how it hits for him and kind of where that puts you in your relationship to the game. Because again, I think this game, it sounds like, has a very personal connection with you. I mean, again, you state it's your favorite game and yeah.
Yeah, I love sharing it with everyone. And, back in the day, back in the mid 90s, it's like no one really knew about it or cared about it. There was just like a small community of people. It had its own Blue Oyster Cult following. And now, because of, pretty much because like Smash Bros and stuff, now it's become more popular and people are realizing, oh, wow, this is kind of a hidden gem. And it's like, well, not exactly hidden. Some of us, that knew about it. But yeah, they're like anyone who hasn't played it yet, I definitely recommend checking it out. And if you can get past Happy Village and the Blue Oyster Cult, then you'll be okay.
That's it. Just power on through. I love it, man. Awesome.
When I was finally able to play as Paula, I guess that was what really stuck out to me, especially even in playing it in about 2015, looking back thinking, this girl is not just some damsel in distress. Yes, sure, she's been kidnapped and she keeps a teddy bear in tow. She is very wise. She's very formidable. She has some very powerful moves. And if you're listening to this episode, I'm about to say a spoiler. But
yeah, go for it. Yeah, this is definitely spoilers. That's perfectly fine.
She is the only way you can defeat the final boss, Giagus.
Yeah. I always wonder about that when it comes to female characters, especially in older games like Earthbound, where this character really has a lot of agency. And I think that was pretty unique for the era. She wasn't a damsel in distress. You weren't wasn't an escort thing. She's very important and vital to the game, as you said, right? Towards the end, she's just, that's it. You can't do it without her.
No.
And I think that really, and I think that's cool that struck you on that recent playthrough.
Yeah. And I think what also attracted her to me is I can be kind of timid and I can be shy and I'm very much, I'm trying to get over it, but I can be a people pleaser. And I think what drew me to Paula, even as an adult, was like, wow, she's not only a badass. Am I allowed to say that?
Of course. Yeah, go for it.
She's not only a badass, but she is gentle. The children at her family's preschool, where her parents own it, they miss her. They keep saying, when's Paula coming back after she was kidnapped? And there are so many times where it's almost like, okay, we have to have a strong female protagonist in a video game or a movie, and she can't have any other traits except she has to be almost extremely macho. She can't have any feelings. She can't be soft. And I think it's really important to show the dynamics of human beings. It's not fair that we have to put people in a box. And that's one of the things I admire about Paula is, even though she doesn't talk a whole lot, she has so many facets of her personality and things that she cares about. And I think it's really cute if at the end of the game, if you don't bring her directly to her parents' preschool, you can actually bring her to Nessa's house and introduce her to your mom.
Yes.
It's really It's cute. It's very cute.
Sweet. Very, very sweet. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. The first time I went to therapy, my therapist used to take me through an exercise where I would have to identify my frustrations or my problems or my anger especially in a physical form. He'd first ask me, what shape is this anger? And then I would have to answer, what color is it? Then I had to identify it, and then physically and emotionally and then mentally take it out of my body and put it in a chair in front of me and then talk to it and interact with it and get to know it. The thought process being conceptualize and make it real so I can deal with it because it is real. As Ness walks through the world of Magic Hand, that is exactly how I feel. Like I am looking into the heart and the mind of a young person and their demons and everything that makes them them. Physical manifestations of emotional stress, trauma, joys, and successes. On this next section, Michael K. Hughes of the Capes and Junk podcast returns to talk about his experiences in Magic Hand, followed by Robert, and then once again, Dan. If you fast forward toward the end game of Earthbound, I find really interesting from a story perspective and a theming perspective. I was really struck with the concept of, I think it was called Magic Hand?
Oh, Magic Hand,
right?
yeah.
Magic Hand, yeah, which is that weird, surreal world where he's like confronting his own demons.
Mm-hmm. It's like a dream world, like in his mind.
and he's actually attacking and defeating his demons, if I remember right. Man, I can't imagine how that would have hit as a kid, like as a young person. Or is it more just like, yeah, this is a weird world, I'm just going to accept it?
Yeah, more or less, because by that point you've already been through Moonside, which is like the opposite. Fourside, everything's neon and black backgrounds, and everyone talks backwards.
I love Moonside. Moonside's one of my favorite locations. I just love that visually, like all that neon and black, and just how fun and different it is. I love Moonside. That might be one of my favorite locations in the game. It's up there.
Bill, I'm going to go out on a limb and say this game's a little weird.
It's a little strange, little bizarre. I think you're accurate on that.
Yeah, I remember it really hit home when I got to Magic Ant.
That's it, yeah.
And seeing the Birdmen and realizing that the Birdmen represented Ness's bravery. And as they died more and more in battle, the only thing I could think of was, oh my God, like Ness is not prepared for whatever's going to come here.
Right.
And he's not prepared for what's coming after this, because this is not even the end game. And this is one of the hardest parts of this game.
Absolutely.
And I remember that was sort of the moment where I was like, okay, this is where he's growing and this is where he's going from here. So because when you beat that part is when he has those memories of being a baby and his psychic abilities waking up for the first time and like moving a toy or whatever, like that's when that happens. And it's like, oh, we are well beyond the pale now that this is over. But I remember seeing Magic Hand and being like, oh great, now I have to fight the dragon thing again, I wish I could remember his name, but but like it was just so different than what had come before because it's so vibrant and yet so dark at the same time. Like all of his lurking fears are there and he's confronting them by himself.
One of my favorite little beats, and again, Earthbound is so full of amazing little beats. There's one moment in, I forget which town you're in, it might be Onet or I forget which, or Tucson, but there's a moment where a person is tending to a flower bed and she asks you to treat the flowers like you should treat yourself, with kindness. What? Just beautiful stuff. There's one moment in that area too. Again, massive. I keep getting it wrong. Massifin, or whatever it is. Where Magic Hand, thank you. I keep saying Magic Hand. Where there's a snowman. And you just, it says, I don't know why I remember this snowman, but I do.
Yeah. Yep.
Whoa. All those little flavors. Oh, it's just,
and it's so cool. True. It's so true how all of our memories work as children, because there's so many things that like little, and I was talking about this the other day with my therapist, and I was talking about the idea of like all these little moments that when they happened, they felt like they were inconsequential. But as you look at them as an adult and as you get older and further away from them, they had such iconography and they meant so much.
Well, I'd love to fast forward a bit to more of the end game, because once you kind of you've collected everything you need to collect, and you're kind of getting towards the end game as you've established a connection with the different characters and your party and who and all that. You get to the end with Gigas, and you begin going through a whole section before that where you start actually literally wrestling with your own demons. Mm-hmm. And how does that strike you? Because I'm sure as a kid, maybe it did. And that's, again, not trying to put words in your mouth. Did that hit? I'm sure it hits you differently now than it did with the kid, because that whole section's about memories you didn't know were there, the snowman that's there, and you didn't remember it, but your brain did, that kind of thing, right? Yeah. It didn't mean anything at the time, but your brain still remembers it somehow. Yeah. And I think we can all, as adults, identify with that, right? How does that hit you now as opposed to when you were a kid?
Man, you know what? It actually, that whole section, like, you're in Magicant, or I don't know. I still don't know if it's pronounced Magicant or Magicant or whatever. You're there, and you got the flying men, who kind of help you out for a little bit. That's always cool. And you get to this one area that you go to right before you face Ness's nightmare, and the music changes, and it just becomes like a super melancholy song, like I don't know, it's kind of spacey, but it's almost like sad in a way. And I've noticed that as I've gotten older, whenever I play through the game, when I get to that point, I feel that like I feel that melancholy, and it's almost like a sadness. And I think part of the reason is because this game, Earthbound, like I'll every few years will go by, and then I'll pick it up again and play through it, and just to like kind of relive how I was when I was like 10 years old or whatever. And then I'll put it down, and then a few years later pick it back up. And when I get to this point, it's so close to the end that kind of sad music comes in, and it just hits me as I realize that once again I am almost done beating the game again. And then who knows when I'll play it again, Like I had fun replaying this game, laughing at all the jokes, all the stuff, and then I get to this point, and it's just like, man, I'm almost there. And, I press through and I can complete the game and everything. But it's once I get to that moment, it's just like knowing that, I'm almost done playing the game again. And, I don't know, it's just, it's like, I remember, like, it just kind of reminds me of like how time has passed, to like the passage of time kind of, and how I'm getting older now, and wow, I'm done beating this game again. I don't know. Sorry, I'm not trying to get all mopey.
No, go for it. No, it's fine. This is important.
Yeah, you brought up that moment, and that kind of does impact me whenever I get to there in the game.
And that's interesting. That does, and I can definitely see that, because it isn't also very contemplative part of the game. Even though it's hard, like you're taking on Starman, and you're it's tough. Like it's a tough area, but there is this sense of things ending and things changing. Right, sure. Ness through the course of this game really does grow up a bit. He ages a bit to the point towards the end. Other characters you've seen before will comment like, wow, you look like you've changed a bit.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, because he faced his own demons. He faced off against this galactic, power, and defeated him with the power of togetherness and unity and community and prayer, right? Like, that's what I think is really beautiful. And I think that's interesting that you have those moments as you're kind of traversing that world that's a very strange, somber, kind of quiet world, and then you take on Gigas, and it's a being you can't beat. I mean, really,
right? Unless
you use the pray command. Do you remember how does that hit for you now when you get to that point, and you are at that point ending where, and again, it now as an adult, like you've played this a bunch of times and you understand that's what it is, but it's got to resonate. It really resonated with me. Like that was like a smack in the face moment of this game. Like, oh my gosh, that's what this game is trying to say. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Well done, Earthbound. I love this moment.
Yeah. That's very different. That, you can't like brute force the boss, the end boss. You don't fight it like you traditionally would, you have to use Paula's prey ability, which, for most playthroughs I've done, I never even touched until that point in the game. It's not a very, it's not that useful up until the end. But have you played any of the other games? Have you played Earthbound Beginnings or Mother 3 at all?
No. Again, since I played it relatively recently, I'd like to at some point, but yeah.
I don't want to spoil much, but the final bosses in those games have kind of a similar situation. Not exactly. But
okay.
I do highly recommend playing Mother 3 though. Like Earthbound Beginnings, you can give or take, but if you like Earthbound, you would love Mother 3.
At the end of the long road of Magicant lies a battle that I didn't expect when I first played it, and honestly, even when I play it again, still strikes me as incredible in not only scope, but emotional weight. Here to talk about the final encounter against Gigas, or Gigas, or however you pronounce it, is Sam from the RetroLogic Podcast, and then Kat from the Mother She Wrote podcast. I will say obviously one of the biggest moments of the game is that ending where all you can do is pray, which is a very interesting choice considering how much Nintendo was sanitizing religion from games during that era, that they allowed that to kind of hit North America, and before we were talking, you mentioned that you serve with a youth group, so I'm assuming you have, some religious kind of bent. How did that strike you, or even strike you now? From that side,
I think it strikes me more so now. At the time, I was like, sure, that's something you would do against a final boss. Why not? It's kind of. At that point, too, the game had tricked me enough times that I was like, of course you're not going to just beat the boss the conventional way. By just, spamming your strongest attacks at it.
Right, yeah.
But I think now, just against the backdrop of so many other games not doing that and not presenting it, one of the things that strikes me, too, and this is, I don't know if this is way too in the weeds thematically, but it's a stock like JRPG thing to fight God at the end of your journey, right?
The deity of some sort.
It's a very kind of if you go into the religious philosophy, a very kind of Gnostic idea. The idea that the creator deity is actually evil, and we have to fight him and take control of everything for ourselves. And it's interesting that Earthbound, because that idea is kind of like a rebellion against the physical creation. And in Earthbound, it's Gigas who's abandoned his physical body. You turn off the nightmare machine and he just becomes this disembodied evil. And it's Ness and his friends that are fighting for the sake of the Earth. I mean, that's part of why it's called Earthbound. Ness and his friends are literally like championing the value of mom and apple pie, against this disembodied evil spirit.
It's very interesting, and I love also too when you use the pray, because again, me playing it just as a brand new person, I tried the pray option once, and it did a negative thing, and from what I understand, it does random stuff throughout the game. And again, this may be reading too deeply into things or overanalyzing, but it almost struck to me as prayer doesn't always work. You know what I mean? Like that, it kind of hit me that way. So when I tried it in game, I was like, oh, well, all right, this is like a joke command or something, right? Again, this game is full of this meta stuff. And then when I realized, oh, that's the only way you're going to defeat the evil is calling on the people you've met and praying, literally, that really hit me rather hard, actually. Like, wow, that's a really beautiful sentiment. Because throughout the balance of the game, it's yay or nay.
It is interesting, too. As I've played the game more, I've found more usefulness in the standard pray command.
Okay.
Simply because I'm kind of prepared for the potential negative consequences of it.
Interesting. Okay.
Because the most frequent penalty you'll get is it will cause everyone to cry, which is the Earthbound equivalent of blindness, essentially. It'll make standard attacks have a high miss rate. But if you're used to just using it a lot, you can always start spamming it against weaker enemies in the hopes that you get some free healing, because this means you don't really have to like keep a full inventory all the time. So I'll do that. I'm much less dependent on items for healing. I guess nice. People complain about the inventory system, so I have my workaround.
I'm one of those.
It can it occasionally grants PP healing, which is extremely rare in the game. You can never buy those items. So
that's true.
Well, except for in Magicant. That's the only place you can buy PP recovery items.
That moment of that final encounter is probably one of my favorite video game encounters. I mean, if I had to do like a corny top 10 or something, it'd be up there, because for exactly what you said, I always struck me as Gigas being this almost like self-forget, like when you're in an anger or, you know, like a rage state, which unfortunately I've been in, you know, I've had issues with that in my past, where there's a self-forgetfulness where you almost, you know, if I was in a situation like that, I wouldn't be able to tell you my name. I wouldn't be able to share that because I've gone away. There is something to me that speaks to me in that moment where this idea of pure evil, the only thing that can possibly extinguish it or defeat it is this kind of pure hope, of this beautiful, innocent hope. And that where that final prey mechanic comes in, that's been sitting there the entire time, the entire game. And after you've exhausted all your options to defeat Gigas, that's your really the only one left. And at least for me playing it, this is literally how I experienced it. I tried using every attack, every magic, nothing worked. And I see this prey thing that I did once 10 hours ago. It did nothing, did something silly. I thought it was a joke. Let me try that. And sure enough, that's what does it. When that happened to me a couple of years ago when I played it for the first time, I was in awe. My mouth hung open. This is something incredible. Like the theming of that is just beautiful. And again, it's this kind of idea of, for me, this pure evil can only be destroyed by a pure innocent light of hope. And again, pray is what they've used. And I'm not sure if there was intentional religious connections or not, or if it was just translation. That I don't know.
It's outside of religion. It's praying in a. I mean, because what effectively happens is that Paula extends her. I mean, obviously she's a psychic child, so there's powers involved. But she extends her thoughts like out to the world and out to all the people that she knows. And I think praying is kind of like an oversimplification, like because it has religious context, so it kind of skews the message a little bit. But it's ultimately what defeats Gigas is the power of love and the power of interconnectedness and and friendship and so forth. Like that's people banding together, feeling a connection. Paula pleads to the universe, and from this point, deep in the past, that call echoes through the minds of the people that they have met, will meet, and then they focus their minds, and together they receive this kind of collective power. It shows the interconnectedness of all things, the interconnectedness of people, how when folks give in to hatred and malice and bigotry, they separate themselves from the world. They separate themselves from other species. Like they separate themselves from all that is good in the world. And the greatest things in life are accomplished via the togetherness of living beings. The Gigas battle comes from so many different directions. It has elements of monolithic horror, body horror, and just pure, I guess, Lynchian horror as well, from the way that David Lynch evokes the kind of inexplicable nature of nightmare visuals. First, the character, obviously, the characters are living as these robots, and everything has this disturbing kind of German expressionist sort of aesthetic to the world you're in, and then you enter this cave that's is it intestines? Is it a uterus? What's going on? And it has no set path. It winds around, and you get to this, this cervix, and see your own face in it. And that, I remember when I first watched this final battle. It was the middle of the day. I was at my friend's house, and he'd gotten to the end of the game before I had. And he was showing me the end of this game. And I was like, what the heck is going on? I could not
right.
I could not believe it. And it was really chilling. And then as you experience the kind of kaleidoscope of Giygas's like formless manifestation, this is where the monolithic horror comes from, the kind of the symmetry of the cervical shape and the exterior like architecture of the landscape you're going through, which is like that's defined by like symmetrical sort of like ominous geometry and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the body horror of Giygas is the idea that this is a creature that's been so consumed by hate that it's lost physical form. And so you experience these melty shapes, which has all been rendered with such intent to have something that like it is. I believe it's arguable whether or not like all the shapes that people have seen in it are intended, but there's two. Like there's the important one is like obviously there's the big swirly like haunting face. That's the one that's like, you know, that's definable. Like that's for sure a thing. But then there's the thing where there's a pattern and everybody sees this. Everybody thinks this. I thought it the first time I saw it, and so did my friend, that it looks like some kind of CAT scan of a fetus, like of a child's like, you know, bulbous head seen in section from the side with like the brain in there and so forth, like, and that speaks to the idea of the kind of like mad infant god that Giygas has become. Like this is I forget the exact quote, but Pokey says like, oh, you know, like there's no, you know, there's no sense left. He's like a child, like, and it's very disturbing, and I think it's also very human. The ways that that hatred can consume a person to where they cease to make sense. They don't the things that could there's just no capacity for comfort anymore. What can you comfort? They've become something else. And of course, but then the dialogue that Giygas is spitting out at you which is inspired by a really disturbing Japanese movie about a guy beheading a woman and like raping her. Which Shigesato Itoi accidentally walked into the theater of when he was a child, and has a memory of the movie that doesn't at all happen in the movie, but something about it just like burned an even worse fiction into his brain, and that's where a lot of the dialogue comes from. Right. It's you're watching this thing that hates you, that's also pleading for help, that's also reacting to the pain that you're inflicting on it. I mean, you just don't forget something like that. It's one of the realest. It's probably the only truly real battle that's ever happened in a video game.
Continuing our conversation about the ending of Earthbound is Kyle VonKubick of the Read Only magazine, followed by Michael K. Hughes. Robert returns. And then Ian, aka Teacher Bloke 85 on Twitter, closes out the section, but not until Kyle returns with some final thoughts about this stunning conclusion.
I do like how the characters are active participants. It's not just prayer, but it's they're working toward saving the world, right? Saving themselves. Right. They give up themselves to defeat this great evil, but in the end they're able to enjoy the fruits of their labor, right? So as I was going into that final battle, and we're in our robot bodies so we can go and fight Giygas, I'm in a dark place. I'm thinking like, man, this game is dark. It's telling you that like the only way to transcend is to leave your physical form, and when you're in a dark place, that's not a good thing to latch on to. No, but really in the end, the game is saying like, hey, you're important. you matter and what you do matters. And that's a really important thing to hear when you're in a dark place.
I think that's really good. And also when the characters go into those robot bodies, they don't expect to come out.
Right.
There's no expectation that they're going to return to their human forms. They're thinking this is it, but they have to. And I think that also links up, again, just hearing your story. And again, apologies if I'm inserting things into that. Sometimes at least for me, when I got sober, I realized I had to change, and knowing very likely I can't go back, because I had gone through those bouts where I'm going to step back and I'll slow the roll, and I do so for 6 months, and I'm right back in.
Right.
And for me, that rings to me as we're talking. Again, sometimes you can't go back, and understanding when you make that decision, as the characters do in Earthbound, we're going to go here. We're likely not coming back, but we have to do this for the greater good. And I think that is pretty powerful.
Right.
And,
right. Yeah. Even though they're back, right? They've saved the world. And they're back on Earth. They are not the same people.
No, not at all. They even, I think some of the NPCs will actually comment on Ness and say, you look different.
Yeah.
And because he's gone through that moment, and he's gone through those trials. I just love the idea of the only thing you can do is pray, which again is very religious in an era when Nintendo, especially Nintendo America, was really avoiding that. Those kind of...
Yeah, even in this, they edited out like the crosses on the hospitals and stuff.
Right. Yeah, that's right. But yet we're having a central thing of praying at the only thing that can defeat Gigas is human emotion. That thing is really cool. Like that's some heady stuff for a silly little Earthbound. Again, where you got creatures who speak in Comic Sans and erasing metal pencils with pencil erasers. Like that's a really deep theme.
I love that every time you use it, it flashes over to people you met along the way.
Yeah,
and they lend their strength to you.
Yeah, they just do it instinctively. Like there's nothing. They just feel like led to at this moment. Hey, let's lend some support. Again, prayer, whatever. But
man. And then the final hit is earlier in the game. You, the player, get a phone call, and you're tasked with inputting your name. So when you use pray that final time, it reaches out to you, the player, to lend the party your strength. It's so good.
Genius. That's genius. It's so good. It is incredible. I remember when I was playing it, and then just a couple years ago, just take it back like, oh, this is so smart and good, because throughout the entire game, you have that icon and you don't know what it does. Like I tried it once in battle and it did something random that was negative. I was like, okay.
It can make all everyone participating in the battle can make them cry. It can restore the party's health a little bit. It's just a lot of random things.
And it's so interesting. Like the effects of prayer can be random, if you want to think really deeply into it. But so I never use it again. I was like, oh, is this just like a joke icon? Because again, the game's full of these like self-referential meta jokes. And when I read, oh, we have to use pray, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's really, really cool and smart. And boy, oh boy, is Gigas creepy. Good.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my.
Big time.
So scary. Like that. Of course, you know me. I love that sort of thing. So I'm like, oh, this is so weird and good.
You get in the battle with it, and it's like Ness can't even comprehend the true form of what he's looking at.
Yes.
It's just a weird, disturbing scrolling background that you see a whole bunch of different ones throughout the game, but this one's just, that's the enemy.
Yeah, that is literally the enemy you're facing off against. I'd love to camp out a bit on the ending of Earthbound, because for me, it's honestly, and I'm trying not to, cover this in hyperbole, but it might be one of my favorite endings of a Super Nintendo game I've played in quite some time. It's up there with your Final Fantasy VI and games like that, because the theme of Paula, all she can do to defeat Gigas is pray. And I know for me, when I use that command in battle throughout the game, it does random stuff. It's not terribly helpful. So as you're taking on Gigas, once you make that realization, oh, well, let me try this because I'm out of stuff to do. and then you realize what the theming is trying to do. It's so successful it's so successful in cementing that idea. Like you said, sometimes all you can do is hope, and sometimes you just need to lean on the, say, prayers or good vibes or good energy of the people you've encountered along the way. The people you impact are the ones that can make the impact. And I think that's just gorgeous. That's a gorgeous sentiment.
Absolutely, especially for kids in 1995. Like that's
totally, yeah.
Oh my God. But also, like, you know, if Gygas represents death, destruction, you know, all the vile things that like lurk within us as people, then hope is the only way you could fight that. And that's like the perfect counterpoint. And that's why Gygas breaks down and Gygas can't wrap its head around what they're doing. Because as soon as that first prayer goes off and the guys in the Runaway Five suddenly are like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, I just got a bad vibe, man. I just got a real bad feeling. I think we need to like pray or hope that those kids are okay. It's like, oh my God, this is what it's been about.
It's so successful. It's really lovely, and yeah, it's just lovely. And Gygas is terrifying. I don't want to see that thing in my nightmares. That's got like Nightmare Box 85, just stored away someplace. Gygas. But again,
I have a Gygas shirt where it's
that's cool.
The four heroes in their robot form about to engage Gygas, and it's like, oh, I love it so much. And that's like, when you think about that too, the fact that they give up their human bodies and they think it's a one-way trip. They're almost guaranteeing that it's a one-way trip. That, yes. You know, if they take out Gygas, there's no guarantee that they're getting home. But the four of them are like, no, we have to do this. We're the chosen four. Like, this is us. And Pooh is like, let's do it. They're all in it to win it, which I love. And like, it's just it almost has that Lord of the Rings vibe too. I don't know if Ottone has ever come out and said that Lord of the Rings was an influence on him either. But the four of them going into the past or into the, you know, the sort of the realm that time forgot kind of vibe. If there was something there that was sort of his like Frodo and Sam going to Mordor moment, because it does feel that way.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Like kind of this hero's journey with friends. And again, it harkens back to the idea that when you're a kid, your friends are everything. They're everything. They're you know, you can't choose your family, but you can choose your friends. And as a kid, especially, having that bond is awesome. It's kind of bond that we just, as adults, we can't have because there's just other things going on. We can't have that single-minded bond. So representing that in this ending and in these overall themes of togetherness and working together really speaks to, again, as a child.
That to me was just so epic. I wasn't expecting the ending of it to be so epic. That's the only word that comes to mind.
Sure.
I think of RPG final bosses, and I just think of, in a lot of cases, a bit of a letdown. But that one was absolutely not a letdown. It was, now use everything you've been taught, but there's a catch. Right. And once you figure out the catch, and you start seeing the ending cutscenes start, and you think, oh, this is beautiful.
It is really gorgeous. I mean, I've talked about this with a number of people already, and the sentiment's always the same. It's honestly one of the more beautiful and stunning moments in 16-bit games for me. I mean, I don't know if I put it if I put a list together, you know, it'd be up there. The idea of praying or just reaching out emotionally to those you've encountered along the way is really powerful and surprising for a Super Nintendo game.
Yeah, it reminded me in a weird kind of way. I mentioned about renting anime movies from Blockbuster, and I remember some of those were a case of, we're never going to beat this guy. Let's defeat them with the power of song or the power of prayer. And it just hit me in all sorts of ways.
It's really, it's a really gorgeous moment. And then when you get further on in the game, as it continues to get more and more surreal, I find it really interesting that you latched onto the ending of it, because it makes sense. Because at the end, And I'm just going to kind of give you my thoughts on it, and then you feel free to comment as well. Ness has gone through an emotional journey where towards the end, he's battling his own insecurities and his own almost demons. So I find that you linking that up with your eventual sobriety is and I apologize if you're still sober or not. I don't know, but
what I did was I cleaned it up. So it was casual drinking became everyday drinking, and me realizing that it was destructive on a personal level for my own health. Thankfully, it didn't spill over into hurting anybody else, right?
Right. No, totally get that. So, okay, that's kind of pump the brakes on it. And I only ask, I'm 3 years sober, so I feel like, thank you. I feel like I can just not identify. Obviously, your story is obviously different than mine, but kind of in the same vein. So anyway, I find it really interesting that the game helped you. It sounds like it helped you draw those lines between your struggles and a character's struggles. And it sounds like it, at least.
I would agree with that. I think the ending, because the game is so famous with breaking the fourth wall, the ending actually talking to me at the end with Paula and praying to defeat Gygas, this big bad, right? This challenge that has been on these characters' back throughout their entire journey, that it's silly. I know I'm talking about a video game very deeply, but I am deeply connected to this game.
It's not silly. Yeah, trust me. Listen, it's not, and I appreciate you going through it. So please continue. I love hearing this.
The idea of prayer, right? And I'm not a religious person, and I don't think the game is trying to espouse religion. If that works for you, that's great. And if it's a positive thing for you in your life, that's fantastic. But I don't think Ottone was pushing any sort of religion more than Ottone was pushing hope.
Yeah.
And that prayer is the hope to overcome the challenge that you're experiencing.
I love that concept. And I've had another guest say a very similar thing where prayer, it's not a specific prayer to a deity, or it's more like you said, that hope, or that reaching out for connection, for that almost reaching out for help. Right. When people who aren't religious, will pray, it's more of just I don't want to say a wish, but more of, again, like a reaching out. Hey, I need some help now.
Right.
Just wanted to take a moment to thank my wonderful patrons who have been supporting me throughout this podcast journey, either for a long time or for a short time. Every one of your contributions matters a huge amount to me. I just had to switch recording software. It's a little more expensive, and the donations from Patreon help support those efforts and make this show better. So thank you to the following wonderful human beings. Started by Terry Canaire, followed by Games with Coffee, Theodore LaBarbera, Tim Knowles of The Elitist, Seth Sergil of the All In Podcast, Greg Sewer of the Generation 16 series of videos and the Player One Podcast, the Let's Play Princess, BT Goebbels, Julian of Nerds Without Pants, and then finally the one and only Pete Harney. And please let me take this opportunity to congratulate Pete on the birth of his first child, his new daughter, PJ, also Paige. She is adorable. All right. I think my kids are pretty cute. I'm not going to lie. But boy, oh boy, she is precious. I cannot wait to see her at the end of this month. So congratulations to Pete and Lindsay for the new arrival. We are all extremely happy. Thank you very much for supporting the show, and let's jump back into the episode. Now, one of the final things I like to do in an interview when talking about a specific game is ask my guests for an elevator pitch. It seems kind of weird, but I always feel like asking people to succinctly encapsulate their thoughts into one final little blurb of a moment really ties things off well. And it's been successful for the most part, and this game was no exception. To give us their elevator pitch to people who may not have ever played Earthbound, but are desperate for something new. We're going with Sam, followed by Celeste, then followed by Kyle, and then finishing the first section, Ian, aka TeacherBloke85 on Twitter. So just kind of wrap up this piece of the conversation. I think we've kind of really gone in and out. Any final thoughts on Earthbound? Or maybe let's put it this way. Let's say I'm me 2 years ago and I, meet you and you're a huge Earthbound fan. We do that recording. I see your background. It's all Earthbound related. I go, man, I've never played it. How would you encourage me to play this? Like, how would you what would be that elevator pitch? They'd be like, no, man, this is a game you should really give a try to.
I mean, it is, I think, thematically and it's just not like anything else, and maybe not so much mechanically, but it's got its own unique little soul, I guess. And kind of just to go back to growing up with the game, like this is something I bring up now and then. I talk about it was my brother that picked it up. I don't know if he's ever even finished it, but he watched me play it a lot. And I don't know if he's ever finished it himself, but he watched me play the game a lot, and it just kind of became this little inside joke between us to just quote lines from the game every now and then. And like I'll call him on the phone, nice. And like when one of us doesn't know what to say, he'll just say like, "Oh, so you want sell things at me, boing?" Like turn into a Mr. Saturn for a little bit, one that was big between us was it's probably a line of dialogue a lot of people don't even see. But if you talk to Frank at the end of the game, Frank, one of the first bosses, he actually tells Ness they should go out for a drink, and then he corrects himself. He says, I mean mineral water, of course, because you're underage. And so it just became like a thing between us to like be like, yeah, let's go drink some mineral water. It's just one of those things. You had to be there, I guess. But
no, it's cool. I love the fact that I love when games can connect people like that, and I really think that's very sweet and very cool that you and your brother my brother and I still have games that we'll quote back and forth at complete randomness. So that's really neat that you have that connection, and that Earthbound provided that ground for that connection. It's super cool.
I think if you have not played it, you really should. If you have a Switch and you have, is it Nintendo Online?
Yeah, it's the Nintendo, Switch Online, yeah.
Yes. I'm so sorry. I cannot remember all these names. I'm like, it's on the Switch, on the emulator thing that they have on there. Play it on the Super Nintendo store if you're curious about it. If you don't like it, that's okay. It's a unique game. It's interesting that it did not do well in the States when it came here in the 90s. And I am hoping one day they officially port Mother 3, the sequel to Earthbound. I have played Mother 3. I haven't beaten it. I keep getting my butt kicked at the end, and I kind of got frustrated. But yeah, oh man, that's another episode right there, Mother 3.
Yeah, for sure, totally. What would be like the elevator pitch to get someone to play this game?
It's a good question, because as we've discussed, Earthbound is quirky and its mechanics can feel dated compared to other 16-bit JRPGs. I would say that if somebody wants to experience a story, I think Earthbound has a story, and it presents that story better than some of its contemporaries. I'm not going to name names, but there's a lot of JRPGs that, I played through in my adulthood and still just have a general idea of what the story was about, even after completion. And I don't want to go to web rings of Angel Fire websites explaining to me what I don't understand because I was too dumb. You know what I mean? Like, right. I believe there's a lot of games out there where too much is left open, whereas Earthbound is an RPG of the 16-bit era that has a complete story. It has a beginning, middle, and end. and you know what you're doing along the way. You might get confused as far as puzzles are concerned or how to defeat a certain area or enemy, but you're not confused as to what these characters are doing and what their motivations are. And I think that can be very appealing to gamers who want to experience a story. And I think Earthbound is the special type of RPG where a lot of people are out there saying, greatest RPG of all time. It's definitely one of my favorite games of all time. Is it the greatest RPG of all time? That's an opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're into RPGs and you're into something quirky and different, or you want to try something quirky or different because you've experienced your Chrono Trigger and your Final Fantasy VI and the real marquee titles that made up the 16-bit generation for North America, then this is a no-brainer. And especially because of all the games that Earthbound has influenced after the fact. There's plenty of kids out there, I'm sure, who've played Undertale and have never spent a second in playing Earthbound. And,
Totally.
And while mechanically, the two games play very differently, where one is more of a traditional Dragon Quest type of RPG, the weirdness and humor are undeniable because, I mean, the creator of Undertale was greatly influenced by Earthbound. But there's even more stuff coming out today on Steam that I'm sure you or I aren't even aware of that is directly influenced by this game. And I think that's probably the biggest part of Earthbound is its influence.
Any other strong thoughts or feelings about Earthbound? Again, it sounds like you've played it for, it's been a while for you.
It has been a while, and I've played a lot of games since then,
sure.
but it does have pride of place in my collection. It's one that I'll not let go of for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But I do remember chatting with an old friend once, and he'd just bought a copy, and he'd spent hundreds of pounds.
Wow.
On his copy, and I just said, I won't tell you what I bought it for then.
Yeah. 20 something odd years ago, yeah. Or 30 at this point.
Yeah, jeez. But that's the thing, isn't it? It's all those years ago, and it was the time of the N64, the time of, Ocarina of Time, when I was playing a Super Nintendo game that really doesn't look all that great at first glance, but it's the game that dragged me in and dragged me away from that 64-bit console. So for it to do that, credit to it.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you're right, because again, that was I was at the tail end of the SNES life cycle, and the N64 was a year away, and here's this very simple game that doesn't look like all that much. I mean, the graphics of Earthbound, I think, are very beautiful and charming and endearing. It looks like a early Super Nintendo game, like early, like a 91, 92 era.
It looks like someone had made it in Mario Paint.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. It looked like, something out of Mario Paint. Yeah, you're 100% right. I think it's Earthbound's just a singular experience. I think it's a game everyone should give a shot. If you like games, you should play it. I say just play it with a spoiler-free walkthrough. That's what I did.
Yes.
Because a lot of the friction in the game is kind of unnecessary, and I don't know. I'm old, man. I don't have time for that. I got no time to.
No, you're absolutely right. It's one of those games that, as you say, if you're interested in gaming and gaming history, it's important.
Rounding out our series of elevator pitches and this episode is Lucas White, followed by Rigney of the Reliving Retro Podcast, and finally, audio producer extraordinaire, Mustin. How would you encourage somebody who's never played Earthbound? It's on the NSO now. Anybody can play it very easily if you have Switch Online. And someone looks at it and says, people love this Earthbound game. What about it do you think I should play? And again, these are people our age, like adults, not kids. Kids are easy sell. You can be like, they talk about farts and poop. And the kid's like, oh, sweet, that's awesome. I have a 7-year-old. He'd just be into that so much. But an adult, who has limited amount of time on the planet, how would you encourage how would you encourage someone to play it?
sincerity, I think, is a really important thing. Like think about if you're into RPGs, think about the ones you like, and think about how they sort of frame their like stories. You know, there's a lot of like melodrama and capital L lore.
Sure.
And just like very, very serious and very blockbustery type of games that sort of dominate. And this is something that's kind of, it's rough around the edges, but it really like wears its heart on its sleeve. And I think that I really hate to do the thing where it's like just give it a few minutes to get through watch the first episode. It gets better.
Yeah.
Because it always feels kind of like a cop-out.
Sure. That's fair.
But it's like, this is a game that is different in a very, like, emotionally driven way. But emotionally, not in, like, a dramatic way, but in, like, a very, like, personable, human kind of way.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it. It's a very human game, and it's got a lot of... I always point to just how much flavor is in this game. I mean, it's... I would... The way I would kind of frame it, I think, as I was just listening to you talk about it, would be give it a long afternoon. Like rainy day or crappy out, you got the Switch out, you're thinking, I have a window of like 3 hours or 4 hours, and just tool through it. And I would also encourage someone to just get the spoiler-free walkthrough. I have one I can recommend. You know, like here, don't get spoiled on the story and the flavor, because that's the fun part of this game. Use this walkthrough, see what you think, and cut that friction off. And if it doesn't work for you after the first 4 hours or so with a walkthrough, that you're not like stumbling your way through, if it's not hitting for you, then it might not be for you. Hey, you burned an afternoon.
That I do think this game may have ruined conventional RPGs for me, because this was one of the first RPGs I'd ever played, which, whatever, you could say it's a bad thing or not, but I just get so, I think, bored with conventional RPGs and the story and the characters that you fight, the characters that you usually are. It's kind of like, it seems like it's the same old song and dance for me, which is why if anybody ever asks for an RPG recommendation, I'm always like Earthbound. It's so different that you have to play it.
Yeah.
If you're into RPGs and you haven't played Earthbound, you need to, because it's the only one different enough to really deserve being I completely lost track of what I was saying. But no, it's the only one different enough, I guess, to just deserve that big of a recommendation.
The fandom is something else. There are very excellent, well, let's just say there are some very enthusiastic fandoms from StarCraft, World of Warcraft, Pokemon, all kinds of stuff. But there was something very specific and special about this Mother Earthbound fandom, especially here in the United States, that pushed so hard that I think it really was this group of ragtag grassroots kids that really helped. Because, I mean, was his name Ottone? Ottone is the name of the creator. Yeah, he had no idea that the game was liked at all in the United States, like, because it was such an abysmal failure. Nuts. But for a bunch of kids from the United States to go to Japan and bring a bunch of their Earthbound related fan art and musics, and show and share, like, he had no idea that there were so many people that loved his stuff, and they still are pushing for Mother 3, and it's I haven't seen anything like it. I was involved in it before I've actually played the game, and I don't even know how to explain it, but I do know, like, I met Toby Fox before Undertale, like, officially came out. I think it was still like the beta for the Kickstarter or something. I had no idea what it was. I didn't know anything.
Right.
And
right.
It's probably a good thing, because I don't know, I may have totally geeked out on him. I've never really been starstruck. I know that I would be starstruck for Donald Glover, and then I just have so many things I would like to ask Toby Fox for which he would have no answer. But I met him, and he, he was hugely influenced by this game. But I met him at a convention focused around the people that love this game, and they were playing the game like live as a telethon and having this music. I mean, like a whole game show thing going on while somebody's playing the game, and then there was a huge like music concert, and they built like some kids built a, like, the way that you would see a Chinese dragon. They built like the Kraken from the game. And,
cool. That's
and
cool.
in your swag bag, they had flip flops. And so you could take your flip flops and throw them at the Kraken, which is what you're supposed to do in the game. And it's just like the level. I mean, I just don't see that kind of stuff in such detail and the love for it. I just always been impressed by the Earthbound kids. And another thing is that it's always been really nice. Maybe a little awkward, but like no one's ever been like mean. Whereas in some other places there can be some gatekeeping or just some, just mean, shrewd people. But yeah, so I definitely big ups to the Earthbound hardcore community, because they've been cool.
It's cool. I don't know anyone personally from that. And as I'm going through these interviews, the one thing that I do keep coming back to is that community, because it's very pure.
Mm-hmm.
There's a purity to it. I'll say not innocence, but maybe innocence. There's just a love. There's, like you said, there's no, Final Fantasy fans can be, pretty crappy sometimes, and Legend of Zelda fans can be very divisive, and every fandom has an element that detracts from the overall fandom. And I actually love fandoms. I think fandom is a good thing. I think finding community around a particular work or piece or art, I think that's really good. Unfortunately, fandoms can get toxic, and the bad actors can overrule the balance of the people who are just there to enjoy and experience the game in community with people. But Earthbound, as I've been looking through it, it's intense and it just seems cool. It doesn't seem like there's anybody, and I guess that's a testament to the type of game we're talking about, that has an innocence to it, that has the deep themes, and that I think people really intensely connected with throughout the generations. Yeah. So it's a pretty special thing. There's likely, as I'm going through these interviews, I'm already building out my second set of interviews about Earthbound, because there's just too much stuff. And the second set's probably about the community, just because it's so interesting what grew from this, like you said, a game that wasn't successful here, that all of a sudden became more than a cult classic. It became an important, beloved part of Super Nintendo, and I'd almost say RPG history. So
yeah, I mean, I could tell you the people to talk to for sure, because there's it's a good big community out there.
Now, I think I've said this before. I think I've mentioned this in earlier episodes. It's been a long month.
But this was intended to be a single episode on Earthbound, just one show that would kind of bridge the gap between my back-to-school season at work and the upcoming Final Fantasy series, among the other small episodes I did. It ballooned to 4. Once I had all the interviews recorded and collated, I knew this had to be a month, not a day. And then I just started getting to know the community. That aforementioned group of people and group of fans that Mustin just talked about. So part 5 of this Earthbound series is going to be a 3-interview episode that focuses on the Earthbound community, where I chat with a curator, a creator, and a couple. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of A Gamer Looks at 40. If you enjoyed this episode, there are 3 more episodes all about Earthbound and 80-something about a variety of other topics. Please peruse the archives of the show. I'm guarantee you there's something you'll enjoy if you enjoy these conversations. If you haven't already, follow me on Twitter/X at A Gamer Looks at 4040. I will be at the Portland Retro Gaming Expo on October 13th through 15th, if memory serves. So if you're attending that show, I'm just attending. I'm just there. I don't have panels. I don't have any booths. So if you're going to Portland for the expo, please just find me. I will be wandering around aimlessly, looking at retro gaming stuff, hopefully playing some retro games, and just enjoying the community. My favorite part about these things is just getting to know people, and who knows, I may stick a microphone in your face and ask you some questions, as I am wont to do. Many thanks to Pete Harney and Kevin from the Discord for helping edit the interviews. Many thanks to my guests for taking their valuable time to be interviewed for this show. And thank you to you for your continued listenership and patronage. Have a great rest of your week, and until next time, just continue being awesome. Right, Will?
Right.